All right. So thank you all for giving me permission to record this. This is Dr. Ted Bobak's class on addiction. So it says you cannot minimize Zoom when you're recording this meeting. So that's interesting. So I will kind of.
You can still share screen, you just can't minimize Zoom.
Got it. All right. So it takes a little while to get this all together, but I will. All right. So thank you for the invitation to come to this class on in the fall day of October 17th, 2022. And I always like having a chance to come into one of the DePaul classes to give a little bit of some of the history. Can everybody see this okay? Is everything good with this one?
I can't see.
You can see it okay?
I cannot.
Oh, you can't see it.
No, I just see the Zoom.
Can you, okay, so I just need to share the screen.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Thanks. All right.
Now I can see it.
Fantastic. Good.
Mhm.
Good. We're slowly getting there. All right. How about now? Can you see it okay?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you're going for, slideshow.
Good. So we're good. Okay, thank you. So for some of you possibly haven't heard of the Oxford House type of recovery home, but I'm going to be talking about that today and some of the work that we've been doing with this organization for a number of years. And as you all know, we have literally hundreds of thousands of people that come out of jails and prison every year, as well as other types of total institutions, like, for example, substance use treatment programs. And unfortunately, particularly prisons and jails tend to have a punishment focus rather than restorative justice or development of peace-oriented skills and dispositions. And I think, as you also know, when people leave prison or jail or substance use settings, the thing they need probably the most is a safe place to live and a decent paying job. Those two necessities often do not occur. And that's a significant problem to reduce individuals ending up going back to jail or prison after being released. In fact, we've heard stories of people being released from jail or prison in different parts of the country, sometimes in the evening or the middle of the night, with just enough bus fare to kind of get out of the area that they're in. So what are they supposed to do? Often what they end up doing is going back to the same people, places, and things that they were doing before coming into jail or prison, and that's a problem. All right. So some return to social networks of friends and family members that are abusing substances and not engaged in legal work, and confronted with social networks that make it difficult to escape from those types of influences. So I think we know from a policy point of view, if you're thinking about community psychology or clinical community psychology or public health or social work, what is needed is really low-cost places where individuals can go to, those places that have social networks that feature individuals who do not abuse alcohol and drugs and who are employed in legal activities. So I think there might be a couple of people who have their phone not muted. So if you could kind of mute your phones, that'd be great. Thank you for helping out with that. All right. So that's the kind of premise that I was under when I started thinking about this particular type recovery home called Oxford houses. And here you can see 5 Oxford houses, and you can see them on the screen. You know, they look like regular houses in any neighborhood. So,
It's one person's phone. Hey, Kaylee Nelms, can you mute your phone? Because we can all hear you.
Yeah, well, thanks for letting the person know. Appreciate that. All right. So these houses look like they're just regular houses, not treatment facilities, not halfway houses. And that's what a recovery house is. Recovery house is just a regular house where people rent it. And the Oxford house really began 48 years ago. And maybe just giving a little bit of information about the start of this Oxford house. It began in 1975, which is a long time ago. And there were a group of people living in a halfway house that had professional staff. And what happened was, in these particular houses, people were recognized that after they left the house, quite a few of them relapsed. So, but there was time limitation, and that's one of the characteristics of a halfway house. Often you can stay there for a certain number of months and then you have to leave. And this particular house, which 10 or 11 men were living in, was going to close down. And one of the people went to a self-help group meeting and sort of told about the fact that this community that they had, which they had been living in successfully, was going to close, and they were kind of upset about that. So one of the members of the self-help community, the self-help group, said, well, I'll loan you some money so that you can pay your rent. Why don't you just rent the house, stay there? So that was a new idea. And they went back and they talked about it with the house, and the house members said, yeah, let's just rent the house. We've got the money to do it. And that became the first called Oxford House. And they didn't have enough money to hire staff. So they had someone from Vermont who had been connected with one of the founders of the Alcoholics Anonymous meetings that began many years before that. And that person came to this house outside of Washington, D.C. and said, well, why don't you just run it yourself, just like a self-help group meeting? And they said, do you think we can do that? And he said, well, 12-step self-help programs do that. Maybe you could do it too. So that really became the genesis. Ideas from 12-step AA, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and also the fact that they didn't have money to hire staff. And they said, okay, we'll develop rules. And over the first year, the 3 rules that they developed were, one, that you had to pay your fair share of the rent, which was kind of about $100 a week. It was a little bit less then, but in today's money, it would be about that. You had to not take any alcohol or drugs. If you did, you would be evicted. And you had to participate in the shared governance of the house. And they would have meetings once a week, and everyone would vote on policies and vote on kind of whether to, people were doing their tasks and not. And eventually this thing changed in a sense. It was always bottom up. Individuals from the organization made decisions about kind of what the structure of the Oxford House would be. And eventually they had a treasurer, a controller, a person who was a president, in different roles. So everyone, in a sense, had a different role. And they would rotate them every 6 months. So what that gave everyone a chance to do is shared leadership. And they tried not to ever buy a house because that's expensive. They just rented a house. and people were willing to rent them a house because they were good neighbors. They have 7 or 8 people in a house, paying their fair share, and basically, hopefully in a decent area of town, so wouldn't be close to some of the substance use and other types of high crime that occurs in some areas of the city. So that first house eventually worked out well, and they saved up enough money to rent a second house. And up till about 1987, there were about maybe 12 houses. So a small number, mostly on the East Coast, Washington, D.C. area. And then one of the people in the Reagan administration in the 1980s heard about this innovation and said, well, gee, this is a good way of people helping themselves. What can I do to promote this? And they signed a bill that allowed each state of the union to have $100,000 that they could give out as loans. And a house could borrow $4,000, which they'd pay back in 2 years, to basically pay the rent the first couple months and also get beds and other things that the house might need. So that $100,000 revolving fund became available. And once that did, a number of states began to come up with, Oxford houses. And it was in around 2000 that Oxford houses came to Illinois. And my involvement with Oxford House was, I actually saw the founder of this thing, Paul Malloy, on 60 Minutes. When I saw him on 60 Minutes, I said to myself, gee, this is really interesting. And I called him up the next day and asked him if he'd like to have someone working with him and to evaluate it. And he said he would be happy to. So I began working with him. Actually, it was in 91. And I was kind of looking for something that was more comprehensive than some of the substance use prevention programs I had been doing up till then. I've been doing a lot of work on youth access to tobacco, trying to get retailers not to sell minors tobacco. It seemed like a natural extension of some of my work, but it really could allow me to think about more community psychology. So when I started working with Paul Malloy, there was about maybe 200 homes, mostly on the East Coast. And now today there's over 3,000 houses over the whole country. So in the last 30 years, this particular innovation has spread to right now, they serve over 25,000 people are living in these recovery homes across the country. So it's really it's an innovation that has been something that our group at DePaul has been studying over all these different years. And again, one of the interesting pieces of this has been kind of forming a relationship with a natural helping group and trying to work with them collaboratively. And that's really one of the values of the field of community psychology that I'm in, and your instructor, Dr. Ted Bobak, is also in. So we try to look for innovations, and really there's hundreds of innovations that are in the community. Well, regular people are finding solutions to social problems, and we as kind of mental health professionals can kind of work with them to basically bring about some change. All right, so do Oxford houses have an impact on the community that they're in? Well, in one of our studies, we found that residents reported spending about 10.6 hours per month on neighborhood involvement, and 44% were involved in administering and running support groups. So in a sense, it's an Oxford house that's kind of making contributions to their community. We also found that neighborhood involvement around recovery also came in the form of educating the community. 56% of our sample of Oxford House members were involved in educating the community about Oxford houses, and 36% were involved in educating the community on recovery in general. What about involvement around recovery? Well, 39% of participants reported involvement in informing or advising agencies or local leaders, and 32% reported involvement in community anti-drug campaigns. And the involvement took the form of speaking at political events, attending community meetings, public hearings, and forums. Other activities involved working with youth, fundraising, and volunteering time with community organizations. And this was a study we did in 2008 when asked, do you think living in an Oxford house increased your likelihood of involvement in your neighborhood? 86% reported yes. And these two co-authors of mine, Dan Schober is now at DePaul. He got his PhD eventually from University of Kansas. He was a research assistant at my center, and now he's a faculty member in the School of Public Health at DePaul. And Brad Olson, the third author, was at an undergraduate at DePaul, got his social psych degree at Iowa, and then worked at my Center for Community Research for a number of years on Oxford House research, and now is at National Louis University, where he directs a community psychology. He helps direct a community psych program at National Louis. So other research findings, we found a significant positive correlation between the length of staying in an Oxford house and participant involvement in the community. So the more you stayed there, the more you got involved. So this was a grant. This was our first grant that we got from the federal government. We did a number of pilot work from 1991 to the end of the 1990s, about 1999, 2000. And then we were applying for grants to study Oxford House. But what happened was the people who were reviewing the grants kept saying you have to do a randomized study if you want to get funded. And the randomized study would be taking a study population of Oxford House members, which was here, and then randomly assign them to treatment, Oxford House or not Oxford House, and then following them up and then comparing the results. And we said, we really can't do that because each Oxford House makes a decision. They have to have 80% of the residents vote you into the house. So if each house has to decide whether they're going to let someone come in, how can you do a random assignment? Because you could randomly assign someone to an Oxford House and the Oxford House might not accept them as a member.
You're creepy. Why you started?
It's really kind of like a family. You know, you have to be accepted by the family, just like be accepted by the Oxford House. So this was a problem that we ran into, and I called the founder, Paul Malloy. And by that time, we had a pretty good relationship. We'd done another number of pilot studies over the years. And he said, well, you know, I can make this work. We'll get a bunch of Oxford houses, and we'll, if you don't get accepted at the first one, we'll bring the person to the second one. So eventually we were able to get Oxford houses in Illinois to participate with the full support of the Oxford House organization. So this again shows if you develop a relationship with your community partners, the community partners can actually help you out when you need their support to do your research. And they were very interested in this study because they felt if we could actually do a study and find out that it was effective over time, that that could be helpful in spreading the word of the Oxford House. So NIAAA did fund the study 2000, and participants just completing substance abuse treatment were randomly assigned to either an Oxford House or usual care. And we approached 154 people, and 150 agreed to participate. And all participants were assigned to the Oxford House condition were accepted. So that was good. And participants were interviewed every 6 months for a 24-month period over 4 waves. And across the 24-month assessment, we were able to keep 89% of the Oxford House members and 86% of the usual care members. And at 24-month follow-up, those in the Oxford House, that's what OH stands for, compared to the usual care controls, had higher abstinence, 69% versus 35%, higher monthly income, $989 versus $440, and lower incarceration rates, 3% versus 9%. And you can see these, that's reflected here, where Oxford House has better abstinence rate, 69% versus 35%. They have lower incarceration rates, 3% versus 9%, and higher monthly income, $998 versus $440. And the study got a lot of attention when it was published. These are some of the places that published it. So that was one of our studies that we did. And when we released that study, SAMHSA, which is Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration Agency of the federal government, that's what SAMHSA stands for, approved Oxford House as being an empirically validated program. This was in around mid-2000s. And because it now had validation from an independent research group, this helped spread the Oxford House so that more people began to actually adopt this particular program. And right now, this program is, as I said, throughout the whole country and every state and just about every city. So we worked in a sense with the federal government, get funded, but another type work that we have done over times is we've also worked with the court system. And I served as an expert witness in several cases where communities were dealing with NIMBY, which means not in my backyard. And what some communities have done is they prefer to have all these recovery homes and treatment settings in like kind of one segregated part of cities or towns and not spread out through the whole town. Because people don't want to necessarily live next to a house that has people who have substance use disorders. Their fear that it might lower their property value or even lead to some crime. So what communities have sometimes done in different parts of the country is that they have passed laws that have involved saying that you can't have more than 5 people who are unrelated living in a house. So if they pass a law that says in your town, if you have more than 5, you will not be able to have a recovery home, that makes it hard for the recovery homes to exist, because generally you need to have 7 or 8 people in a recovery home to make it inexpensive to live there. So I got contacted by some lawyers and asked me if I knew of anything about whether the number of people in a house made a difference in terms of outcomes. And I looked in my data set that I had, and we did find that if you actually had more people in the house, like 7, 8, 9, or 10 versus 5 or 6 or 4, you actually had better outcomes. They used these findings to basically win the case to stop the community from closing down the Oxford House. And the best example of this is we published this article. So we had an article in print, and one day I got a phone call from an attorney on the East Coast who said they were having a similar problem. And they said that this particular court case had been going on for many months and cost a lot of money. And the city was basically trying to get this particular Oxford House to close down. And the Oxford House organization was fighting back. So I sent them this article and said, well, here's an article that basically says that actually larger houses have better outcomes. And the lawyer shared it with the judge. And by the afternoon, the judge threw the case out. And the lawyer called me back and said he had never heard of anything like that happen before, where basically the court case got thrown out because data was used, suggesting that kind of a larger number of people in the house was actually good. So the judge said there's no basis for the lawsuit. At our annual conventions of Oxford houses, last one occurred in Seattle, 2022. Often people come to these conventions with lots of ideas of things that we can do and study. So, so one of the things that came up, which was just an interesting conversation, was an attendee, an Oxford House resident, came up to me and said, pointed to a woman across the hall and says, "See that woman over there? She's my girlfriend, and she's HIV infected, and I would never have even had anything to do with her before Oxford House, but now I've learned that I need to be concerned about other people and sort of not just myself, and really think about differences and value diversity. And that's something that's important that we learn to live about and learn. And, you know, this is something that I would suggest you should study. So it's not just us stopping drinking and drugging. What else are we doing in our lives? And I hope that you can go back to your team and study that. So that was, again, an important suggestion for us to think about as we did our work. And we actually did go back to our group and we looked at residents of these Oxford houses, and we found that they actually had significant greater tolerance over time than those who didn't have exposure to Oxford houses. And those results supported the claim that residents of communal living settings have superordinate goals of overcoming substance use problems, and older compared to younger residents living in a house for 6 more months experienced the greatest increases in tolerance. So again, some pretty interesting findings. So we've recently, this last year, with your instructor, Dr. Ted Bobak, have published a paper about COVID outcomes as another offshoot of the work that we've done. From March of 2020 to January of 2021, we basically looked at the Oxford House organization, which had about 40,000 individuals living in these Oxford houses during that period of time. And what we found was that only 4 died of COVID. In addition, infection rates were substantially lower in the Oxford houses than in the surrounding areas. So that said to us that even though people in these particular houses were very high risk because of substance use, past behavior, because most of them had been in the criminal justice system, many had other types of health problems. Because of this, we were able to kind of really find that this was a supportive setting that really had effects beyond even, you know, helping people reduce their substance use. So this is kind of in closing with my remarks this morning. We're really, in a sense, talking about reducing health disparities, and racial and ethnic people of color experience more barriers when obtaining substance use services than their white counterparts. And in a recent study that we've done, we looked at outcomes of these recovery homes with substance use disorders, and we actually found that Black ethnicity, if you were Black African-American, you had a significant positive predictor of recovery, even more so than people who were white. So that's kind of, again, an interesting finding of reducing health disparities. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen there. And, I just wanna, again, thank you all for listening to my brief presentation on recovery homes. I think it has a lot of policy implications. And I'll end with telling one of the kind of stories that couple stories that I can just mention. I invited an Oxford House resident to come to one of my classes number of years ago. And I remember him coming into the class and people asked, "What can you tell us your story about coming into Oxford House?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I went to my first interview with the house, and the Oxford House members of the house interviewed him to decide whether they wanted to accept him." And he said to them, "Well, I haven't been a good citizen. I've been in jail, prison for a long time, and I've really not done good things to other people. I've stole, and I've had, lots of different offenses." And they said, "Well, the main thing we want to know is, do you want to make a second effort? Do you want to stop using and change your life?" And he said, "Yeah, I really do." So they said, "We believe you, and we're going to vote you in, because 80% of us feel you're ready for a new change." And they gave him a key to the house. And as they gave him the key to the house, he said, "I don't want the key." And they said, "Why?" He said, "Well, don't you realize I've victimized people in houses. I've been a thief. I've stolen from people. I've really not done good things. Don't give me your key. I can't be trusted." And they said to him, "We trust you." That's what Oxford House is about, giving a person a new chance. It doesn't matter what you've done before. It doesn't matter anything that you might have committed, any type of crime. Are you ready to make a change? And if you are, we're willing to give you a chance. So he said, okay. Took the key, lived in the house for 6 months, was doing very well, got a job, and was able to pay his rent. At 6 months, they approached him and they said, "Well, we've decided we want to make you the treasurer so that you can handle the finances." And he sort of said, "What? Again, I've stolen money. I haven't been a good steward. You can't give me this position. I don't trust myself. Please give it to someone else. This isn't something that you should give me." And they said, "No, this is part of the process of recovery. This is the part of the process of taking on additional responsibilities." They gave him this job and he took it. And again, it's those types of experiences of trusting someone, of believing in someone, of the setting, the friends, the comrades, basically saying, "You deserve another chance." That's what recovery needs to be about, whether it's in Oxford houses or whether it's in any setting. Do the people in the setting believe in those individuals? If they do, and they send this type message, it's an incredibly healing message for these individuals. And this is really what the field of community psychology is about. Whether you want to be a clinical community psychologist, a community psychologist, or some other type of healthcare professional, we need to set up systems that allow those individuals in the settings to basically warmly support behavior change, not to critique, not to second guess, not to sort of feel that the person doesn't have a chance, not to have a bureaucratic system that basically is more focused on liability protection than it is on trying to welcome a person into a new pathway of life. In a sense, we're talking about two people, one person in the past and another person in the future. And we want to give everyone a chance that their future can involve all types of positive things that are so different from the past that they had. That's what recovery homes, particularly those that are Oxford houses, can allow. And that's what we're basically kind of suggesting really are transformative institutions, social settings that provides people inexpensive ways of providing community. Because in the end, that's what it's about. It's changing the people, places, and things. It's basically saying you've been surrounded by people who probably haven't been doing good things, possibly selling, possibly doing illegal activities, not working. And that is going to drag you down. If we can put you into a setting where everyone's working, where everyone's not doing illegal activities, where people aren't taking alcohol or drugs, you have a chance to get a second chance. And that's what we should be doing with everyone, whether it's an Oxford House or any setting that you ever go to, giving people a second chance so that they can really alter their lives in very profound ways. Now, sometimes working with Oxford House presents some challenges to a research team. And as I mentioned, about 30 years ago, when we began working with Oxford Houses, there were no Oxford Houses in Illinois. They were primarily just a couple hundred on the East Coast. And when the founder called me up and said, we're going to send a recruiter to Illinois to open up some Oxford Houses. And that's what they did. They sent Bill Lee, 1992, to Illinois. And so he was staying in a shelter, and he had lived in an Oxford House on the East Coast. So he knew how they function. But in the shelter, he had all his possessions stolen. And he came to us and he said, I'm not sure I'm going to make it. I'm not sure I'm going to be effective in Illinois. So he said, well, we met as a team, and one of our team members actually let him crash at his place for a couple of days, and then the DePaul Sanctuary, which is right next to 2219 Psych Department, North Kenmore, gave him a room, one of the priest rooms, for a couple months to stay there. And we set up a little laboratory phone so that he could make phone calls in the psych department. So we provided him resources because we said to ourselves, well, if we wanted to be pure academics and we want to see how a system fails, we could certainly study that. But why not try to give the guy a chance? We did that. And they opened up the first house in the DePaul area, and they called it the DePaul House to thank us for the help. And over the next year, they opened up 10 or 11 houses. This was about almost 28 years ago. And we sent our volunteers into those houses so that they could learn from what was going on in the houses. And the Oxford House community sent someone to our research meetings to tape record us and then bring it back to them so we could have a two-way process. That's really what community psychology is about, where we basically bring the participants in as partners in the research process so that we all have a chance to learn from each other. And we didn't really do any research the first year, except getting to know them and them getting to know us, trying to find out what was important to them and for them to trust us. And that process worked out very nicely. And because the Oxford House organization really trusted us, and we had years of working with them, providing this type of help, doing some preliminary studies, when it got to the point where we weren't getting a grant, this was in about 2000, to actually do this randomized study, because we had built up this trust, Paul Malloy, the founder, said, we're going to make it work for you. What I didn't know was that before I approached Oxford House after seeing him on the 60-minute film or the video TV program, someone from the East Coast had approached him and said, I'd like to do a randomized study of Oxford Houses. And he said to the person, researcher, I don't know you. Why am I going to let you do a randomized study? There was no relationship. I built up a relationship, and our team did, for years. And we never asked him to do a randomized study. He was the one who said, I'm going to make it work. So if you have a sturdy relationship with your community collaborators, and you're really working with them over time, they will come to the rescue for you, just as you come to the rescue for them. That's what bidirectional help is about. That's what community psychology is about. It's basically we work with our partners and our partners work with us. So we each benefit and we each provide the other resources and opportunities. So if that's the type of work that you want to do, what you need to think about is you got to be able to commit to something for a long period of time to really build those connections. You have to do it not just yourself. When we're trying to bring about change, we really need to work with many groups. That's why the Oxford House has thousands of people in it now. And we are much more effective at trying to bring about change, working with kind of a large group. And we also have to realize that there are institutional barriers. You know, there are a lot of people who want to keep things the way they are, the status quo. Just keep things, you'll learn about the concepts of first order versus second order change in some of this course. First order change is like a Band-Aid approach. Second order change is really making structural changes to the ways in which services and help is delivered. So if you really want to do something that's structural, that's basically more enduring, that's probably going to be more significant than just a Band-Aid first order change, then you've got to basically be connected over time to institutions and organizations that can challenge the status quo. And what do we have to offer? We have research and we have theory and we have mental health issues that we're all studying, and we can become experts in those areas. And because we have the ability to answer questions in ways that most community organizers never know how to actually do that. They have a hunch, they have an assumption that something works. We can set up a study, an experiment to really find out whether something works or doesn't, is effective or not, if a program is valuable. Just like the randomized study of Oxford houses, we were able to prove that Oxford houses led to better abstinence over 2 years than not having Oxford houses. Because we add value to the social change process, we're accepted, readily accepted, welcomed by these activists to bring about change. Well, I've gone on for a period of time now. I want to just give you a chance to ask any questions that you might have of either recovery homes, like Oxford houses, which are self-governed. There's no professional staff. It's still self-governed. It was that way in 1975. It's that way today. And there are some other types of recovery homes that are governed, that they have staff, just different types. I've been interested in the more self-governed type because it's closer to the field of community psychology. But if anybody would like to pose any questions, send me a chat or ask a question. I'm happy to try to respond to your questions. So I'll give you some space at this point.
If somebody has questions, this is the time for you to ask. Also, Dr. Jason, I had them submit questions online prior. So if nobody speaks up in like the next few seconds, I'll start asking the questions that were submitted. I highlighted a lot of the, they were all good questions, but I highlighted some of the ones that I thought were really relevant. But does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask live?
So we've got one question. Madeline, thank you for asking it. The question is there a limit to how many people can benefit from this at any given time? So it's like a family. Oxford houses are like 7 or 8, 9 people living together. You know, sometimes people talk about recovery homes of having hundreds of people. I don't think really hundreds of people is a community. I think it's got to be something where everybody knows everyone, sees everyone on a regular basis. And I think if you're really concerned about establishing a sense of community and belonging, and you know people are connected, then I think those types of communities are best. But that little community, generally, there's a chapter of usually maybe 8 to 10 houses. and they meet on a monthly basis. So you really have a chance to meet with a chapter, and then the state has meetings, and then the states are connected with central office in Maryland. So yes, it is something that's small, and I kind of like that idea. In terms of how it works. It also, another question was, what happens to someone who's court ordered to go to Oxford House? Well, it's really interesting. We have a group in, we've just heard a little bit about some states that actually have programs where they give the people coming out of jail like a month time to live in an Oxford House, so that they pay their rent, so that they can get established and find a job, and they won't have to pay, that $100 to $120 a week. So that gives them a chance. So some jails, and actually we're just in the process of setting up a study now to look at something like that, with which courts trying to help people in recovery homes give the first month rent to try to help them stay there. So that's a really important thing. We think it's an innovation to help people transition from jail and prison to the community. So yes, we have millions of people in jail. Many of them don't need to be there, but we have over 500,000 coming out of jail every year. Where do they go? Wouldn't it be cool if we had a recovery home that they could go to if they wanted? Wouldn't it be good if every university had a recovery home and Oxford House connected to DePaul? That'd be kind of pretty cool. As a matter of fact, in North Carolina, there's several colleges there, University of North Carolina, that have actually set up Oxford House recovery homes for students. There's Oxford Houses that have started on Native American reservations. So there's all these types of innovations that are occurring. Another question, Vito, thanks for asking that. Any idea of why people in Oxford House houses suffered less from COVID? So that's a great question. I think what could be happening is if you live in a recovery home and your abstinence is at risk if anyone else starts using, because so everyone who stays abstinent is responsible for everyone else. They're in an abstinent community, so they care about everyone sort of not taking drugs or alcohol to maintain all of their abstinence. The same process could occur with trying not to get infected. They might be kind of practicing like wearing a mask, being vaccinated, trying not to expose themselves. So that could also occur. Just as they're thinking about others in terms of their substance use, they're also thinking about others in terms of their health behavior. So trying to kind of reduce their risk is something that protects the whole house. So that might be why we got our results, but certainly it was just one study. We would love to do more research in that area too, but we did publish it in a nice journal, and I think Dr. Bobak, he worked on it for many months, and a couple of our DePaul undergraduates actually participated in helping write that study up. So that was great. So Natalie has asked, and hello to you, Natalie. Besides staying clean, are there any rules that individuals have to follow when living in Oxford houses? So yeah, staying clean in terms of not taking alcohol or drugs, that's one. But there are two other rules that everyone has to follow in these like cookie cutters. Each house is really similar, and there's over 3,000 of them around the country today. The second rule is you have to pay your fair share. So you got 7 people in a house. If they all pay, the amount, which might be $100 to $125 a week, which is very reasonable. If you think about rental prices today. You can, get a job and pay for that. So that's the second piece. And then you're also supposed to participate in self-governance. So, there's a weekly meeting, business meeting that occurs, and we ask, the people in the house should come to the business meeting and participate. And everyone then can, and there's a lot of little subtle rules. So they don't want you to kind of get too alone. Like if you're spending a lot of time in your room by yourself, that's usually a predictor of something bad is going to happen because the person's isolating. So they try to stop isolation by telling the person, we want you to interact with others. Or if they kind of leave the dishes in, they'll get fined. If they don't take their wash out, they can get fined. If they do other things in the house that aren't kind of going along with the house rules, the house will fine them. So that occurs at the business meeting. But there's also chances to meet everyone. So when you get voted into the house, you do one-on-ones with everyone. And what that means is that everyone has a chance to meet everyone. So you sort of sit down, you have a conversation to get to know them. Can you imagine that? Wouldn't that be kind of cool thing in your class, with everyone in your class having to do a one-on-one with each other? Maybe it's a little bit too many in this class, but get to know everybody so that you know everyone, and they all become people you're connected to. You know their past stories, so you care about them. It's one way of building a sense of community. So another question that Natalie brought up is, what is done to ensure that everyone is respectful of everyone else's boundaries in a sober house? Well, as I said, there's contracts that are set up. People go to things together. They'll go to like a self-help mutual help meeting together. Sometimes they'll have like a celebration of sobriety or of an anniversary. Sometimes they have like a chapter meeting where several houses get together and have a party. So there's lots of kind of joyous things too that happen in these houses. And in terms of boundaries, if someone does something that's hurtful to another, they talk about it at the business meeting. So this is a way of kind of being able to continue to get feedback from others on how you're relating to your peers in the house. All right, so we have something from it's either, might be Edie or Eddie, probably Edie. I was wondering what the first meeting was like with the Chicago Oxford House. And I know you said that you just spent the first year getting to know everyone within it without talking about research, but how was everything initiated? Since it was a group of psych academics, was there any distrust at first in the Oxford House, worried that they were going to be exploited? Well, that's a good question. And one thing that we found was that when we went into these Oxford houses, we went to their business meetings, so we could actually hear how they kind of processed issues in their house. And they sent the representative to their meeting, to our research meetings, so that they could see what we were studying. And all we wanted to do was say what was important to study. What did we want to learn? What did they want to learn? So really, we didn't know how they would react to us, but they reacted pretty positively. They welcomed us. And we now have a research team at DePaul that's studying Oxford houses. And one of the things that we're going to try to do is have people from our team go visit kind of an Oxford house so that they can have a chance to see what happens at a house meeting. So that type of direct experience was something I thought was important from year one. And, I think continues to be important for us to get to know them and for them to get to know us academics. And, as an academic, you don't want to use big words. You want to keep it simple. And, one thing that's useful to do is, and I sometimes say that to some of my students, I say, well, just make believe you're talking to your grandmother or your grandfather. Say it simply. Say it in 30 seconds, what you're doing. And if you can learn how to talk kind of real easy, simply, but directly about what you're doing, what you're interested in, that's a great skill to have. So we try doing that with our Oxford House partners. And you'd be surprised. Some of the Oxford House members are pretty sophisticated, and they ask us pretty very good research questions about what we're doing and how to interpret our results. So it's a good interactional process that we're involved in. All right, so I think I've gotten through the questions, and thank you for great questions. Ted, do you have any other ones that you have on the list that you want, or if anybody else in the class has any other questions they'd like to ask me, I'm happy to try to answer it.
There was one, I don't know if you covered it or not, but the person is wondering if like a person who's a drug addict would get put into the same house, Oxford House, as someone, let's say, who's an alcoholic. And I don't know if you touched on that or not, but one student didn't want to know.
So if I got that right, if a person is using one type drug, maybe alcohol, how do they get along with a house that might be using heroin, for example, or had been using heroin?
Or if they're even allowed to share the same house.
So, the only thing that separates the houses is if you're male or female. They try to keep the houses, males in one house, females in another house. But it gets a little more complicated because there are some houses that are for trans in terms of what people's sexuality is. But anything else, they try to just let anyone come in with different types of experiences. But I do think there's differences in the houses. I think younger houses, people who might be like 18 to 25 or 30, might have different sets of issues that they're dealing with than houses that are, for people who are maybe 50 and 60. Folks who are 50 and 60 often have had more lengthy addictions, and those who are younger might have been dealing in the substance use world for less period of time. The substances that they're using might be different. So a person who is primarily addicted to alcohol as their drug of first choice might have some differences with the person who is addicted to heroin, but they're still addicted, and they still have issues. That there might be differences, and there certainly are. That's certainly, I think, a useful thing for us to study in terms of where they got the drugs. One is a legal drug, so the alcohol, we know there's a lot more people that have an alcohol addiction than do a substance use addiction. Alcohol is legal, so you're not going to possibly have the same types of legal problems, except if you're driving under the influence. Whereas the substance use disorder person who has a heroin addiction is going after a drug that's illegal, and they could spend jail time just trying to search for that particular drug. So they might have different pathways in terms of their recovery or in terms of their using patterns, and they could have different issues in terms of their recovery trajectory. Remember, recovery is not something that occurs in a couple of days or weeks. Generally, you're talking about 5 years period of time to really get into recovery. And then another 5 years to get back to be similar to at risk of the general population. So it's a long process. Recovery is not something you get quickly. And what you want to do is provide those opportunities for people. Often our society, helps people with substance use treatment programs. Used to be for 6 months and then 28 days, and now it's often just detoxification. A lot of people, that's just the beginning process. And what they need is much longer periods of time to really get themselves in a place where they can, become somewhat similar to what they were before they started using.
I have one more question that we can, because there's so many good questions, but I'll make it a two-parter. So the student asked, what are the most common factors that you see that contribute to relapse? That's one, you can answer that, and then talk about, like, let's say some of the students were interested in volunteering at the center in your lab there. What would they have to do? But maybe answer the contributing to relapse and then see about the volunteer part.
Well, our belief with the relapse has often been, if you hang around people who are using, it's going to be hard to resist. So if the important people in your life are all using drugs and doing illegal things, doing crime, you're going to have that social pressure to be part of that gang or be part of that group. So to the extent that you can limit your exposure to people who are doing things that are going to get them in trouble, I think that's a real predictor. Can you change your social networks? And such an easy thing sounds like so difficult to do. And that's why any social process that basically gets at trying to help people, really change the social network. The problem is lots of our interventions tend to be very expensive, and we don't, as a society, have the money, even though over 100,000 people are dying of these kind of substance use disorders a year, which is incredible. We don't have the money to sort of set up the really expensive programming that might be needed for people who are so desperate that they're seeking drugs to sort of help them get through the day. So what can we do to help change their lives structurally, fundamentally, that doesn't cost society a lot of money, which they're probably not going to be willing to pay for in the long run? And that's why we as community psychologists are thinking about creative new ways of delivering services. And that's why when I heard about Oxford Houses, I said, gee, this is something I can participate with and try to understand why it works, how it works, and contribute to the process of helping that organization. But Oxford House is just one of many that are dealing with addiction, that are trying to help people make change. To the extent that you have employment, that's probably a pretty good predictor. To the extent that you have your health and you can be employed, that's another kind of predictor. To the extent that you have a sense of yourself as being more than someone who's taking alcohol or drugs, but you have some meaning in your life, and you have something that you're committed to. It could be could be a spouse, could be a family, it could be some type of religious movement, it could be an educational degree you're trying to get, it could be a social change process you want to participate in. There's many things that can give meaning. So can you get meaning in life that provides you a buffer from the temptations to basically slide back to basically using as a defense, as an escape mechanism for all the difficulties it is to live in life today. So in terms of what types of things people can do, certainly if folks have interest in learning more about some of the addiction research we're doing, they can get in touch with Ted. Ted does come to our research meetings that occur. We have them at the center on Fridays, and we are meeting with a group of people at 12:30 to 1:30, and we do it half in person and then half on Zoom. But yeah, if people would like to kind of learn more about that, you can certainly talk to Ted and he can give you more information.
We appreciate your time. I got my hand clapping there because I don't know what we do on Zoom, but thank you, Dr. Jason, for coming through. And I'm sure my students are really appreciative. I know you're also busy. So if you'd like to, you could stop recording, then make me the host. And, I could finish up class 10 here for a few minutes and just put them in for.
Okay. I will try. I'll stop the